It's been the biggest week of FACEIT action so far, with 3 rounds all crammed into this week 3 of FACEIT League, which means there's a whole lot of action to catch you guys up on. So we're going to take a look at all of the fixtures that did happen this week, have a little bit of a look ahead to next week, and just try and get a feeling now as we sort of approach the halfway stage, exactly who is at the top of the rankings and who's going to be getting these top 8 spots in EMEA. So let me take you to the schedule now so you can see a little bit more what we're talking about. As you can see, we're on this chunky fella right here, all 3 game weeks. Maybe some of the particular highlights we expected were SSG against Twisted Minds and the SSG against Ataraxia. Now, this SSG Twisted game was actually moved to week 4, so we'll talk about that a little bit later when we do the big look ahead. But for now, we're going to focus on all of these games. There's quite a lot, so I'll do my best to inform you as best I can about everything that's happened so far this week. We'll start with Celtas against nu.age, which was all the way back on Monday of last week, and nu.age actually managed to win this one. Now, nu.age are a team we've not really talked about too much on the show so far, as they've been sort of lingering in the sort of lower half of the table. Celtas are in a similar boat, so a 2-0 over them here for nu.age is actually a pretty good result. We always talk about it where in a sort of 16-team bracket with pretty big skill disparities, there's always going to be some teams you expect to beat, some teams you expect to lose to, and then those games against the middle teams, those are the big ones for deciding exactly how well you do. So nu.age getting the win here is actually massive for them, and it was a pretty good week for nu.age overall, so we'll talk about them more as we go through and we get to their other matches. Next up was ToughShells versus Metaboiz. Now, I think most people, myself included, had ToughShells quite low down the rankings, expecting them to be one of the bottom 2 teams. So beating Metaboiz here, actually a huge result for them. We watched one of the Metaboiz games earlier, and we'll talk about when we get to that fixture. So we actually thought Metaboiz were maybe on the up. But this result against ToughShells is actually a really big blow for them. And even though they had a decent performance later in the week as well, Metaboiz, ultimately they didn't actually get a lot of wins. So it's not looking great for the Metaboiz, even though maybe some of their individual performances have captured the hearts of a few fans. We then get on to Team Peps versus R8. Now, R8 are the one-trick team, so there's always a little bit of scope here where you can be upset by them if you're not careful, but it was anything but scary for Peps. Super straightforward. They beat R8, and not a great look for R8. Not that they necessarily expect to win this game, but the fact that it wasn't even close is maybe a bit of a bad omen, and this was only the start of the week for R8, and it actually gets worse from here, which we'll get onto later. Next up is Sovreigns, and I use next up in both contexts of the phrase because they weren't really a team who were on my radar. They're the old quick esports, but they put together a string of decent results here. The first was maybe the most expected of all of them, where they beat Meavedron. Meavedron do very much feel like they're probably going to be the bottom team out of this top 16, and a relatively straightforward victory for most teams, and the Sovreigns got very much the same here. Then we move on to ROCstars versus R8 Esports. So now it does say AFK from this first round as in like a default, but that's not true. It's just a bit of a bug on the FACEIT system, I believe. But still straightforward for R8 Esports. ROC we talked about a lot about last week in terms of how they've struggled. They've not really managed to capitalize on any of that promise they once had, and that now seems like a very distant memory. Meanwhile, R8 are a team that seems to be going kind of from strength to strength after their tough start. R8, I really like these guys. I think they're playing a lot of different comps into different opponents. They're really trying to solve each opponent a little bit more than a lot of teams who maybe just play the same style of comp in every situation. So a lot of time for that and that approach to the game, and glad to see them win here over ROCstars. Then we move on to Quick Esports against Ataraxia. Now, Ataraxia are, in many ways, the big story as of late. After beating ENCE previously, they've really sort of made a name for themselves in terms of one of the teams that can maybe even challenge the big boys in the form of ENCE and SSG. They had to play Quick Esports here, who have really struggled since being picked up by Quick Esports and leaving the D Impero name behind. And they continue to struggle here. You'd expect them to lose this one, but obviously not too much more to talk about on that one. The favourite team won. We move on to ENCE versus Supershy now, and now Supershy were without Hitori, which meant maybe a lot of the competitions they would have liked to have played into ENCE weren't available. They still tried to run some of them on Oasis with tools playing Winston, but as you can imagine, it really didn't go as well, and it's actually ended up being a pretty straightforward win for ENCE. So again, Supershy, a team that showed a lot of promise after their win over Rex Oblivion in OWCS Stage 2, are struggling to actually convert some of that potential or some of that promise into meaningful results here. But again, ENCE is a team they would expect to lose to, so it's not the end of the world, and they had not their full roster available. So an understandable loss here. We then get on to what on paper is a very surprising result in terms of the ToughShells, one of the weaker teams we fought, beating yeah, the one-trick team, quite difficult to solve. But this was actually a default victory, a forfeit coming out from yeah. As you can see, we've got no scoreboard. And this was not, we'll talk about the other one later, but this was not the only default yeah had to concede, meaning this has been an absolutely tragic week for yeah. Because now a team they would expect to beat and be a bit of a slam dunk points on the board ends up being a loss. And this really jeopardizes their chance to get into top 8 quite significantly. Then we got the French derby, which on paper shouldn't have actually been that exciting. Peps should have been heavy favourites. They've been in reasonably good form and nu.age have been struggling. But this was anything but straightforward. Once we got past Oasis, to be fair. Oasis was all Peps all the way. They looked infallible. nu.age didn't get close to them at all in either the dive mirror or the ram mirror. But once we got to Eichenwald, and all of a sudden nu.age were playing some dive into Peps, playing these ram type comps, they start to cause a massive problems. I think Tama was getting a lot of value. Dip, especially on the Echo on Eichenwald, really made several huge plays to carry his team there to victory. And then we go to Route 66, and it's a dive mirror. nu.age on their best comp, and all of a sudden we see Tread on Winston start to have a few issues, especially against Vienna, Slept, Nade, all of the things that could go wrong. Meanwhile, on the other side of it, Tama was getting value with every nano. Every nano was 2 kills. And it really started to look like it was slipping away from Peps. We saw a lot of back and forth, but ultimately, once we got to the overtime round, it was a pretty good call, I think, from Tread in the end to push with bubble advantage. They clutch out the overtime round and they managed to win. And they get a victory they would have really expected to get the entire time, but I think you look at this from nu.age's perspective, and a very impressive performance here, combined with their earlier win of the week against Celtas. And it's actually all trending up for nu.age here, so I think a lot of their players looked good. We mentioned Tama and Dip already. I think Zerion also had a very good game, so a lot of things maybe starting to click for nu.age here, and they're definitely a team on the up. Then we get to Ataraxia Supershy, and this felt a little bit more like the Supershy we saw before, where they were causing issues and upsetting Ex-Oblivion. Ataraxia rolled out on their double flex composition, as they always do. And then Supershy started going Mauga. Tama got on the Mauga. And it started causing so many problems for Ataraxia. They absolutely scraped through a Busan victory. But then once we got to Midtown, again, I don't understand how Ataraxia are always able to get such a good draft, especially when Supershy got to pick the map. We end up going to Midtown, which is a great map for double flex. And this one wasn't close at all. All of a sudden, Tools came in, they were playing Bat Brig, and it did not look close at all. Ataraxia sweeped them on Midtown. So it's a bit of a shame, especially with how well Nat Busan went. Now, they didn't lean into more of that type of composition, even if it's maybe not what they play on the map, because Supershy, I think, really could have won that Busan and really could have given them more of a challenge on Midtown, or even if they just picked another map potentially as well. So I don't know how Ataraxia keep getting away with these map drafts, but somebody's up there is smiling down on them. They keep getting it. Ataraxia, another win. Then we get a series that a lot of people maybe wouldn't have been too excited about on the face of it. R8 Esports versus Metaboiz. R8 should just put them to bed, right? Knock them back down. We've seen Metaboiz struggle throughout FACEIT League so far, but this game was anything but. As soon as it finished, I got DMs from multiple players saying, you have to watch this game. What a game. What a series. And I watched it, and I honestly wasn't disappointed. They had not oversold it at all. This is probably the best FACEIT game you're going to see. It's maybe not the biggest clash in terms of biggest teams, but in terms of close fights, excitement, momentum swings, big pop-off plays from both players on both, or from all players on all teams, it was great. If you haven't watched this, I'll put the link up here somewhere. I'll put the link somewhere. Go watch this game, even if you're not super familiar with a lot of the players. I think you'll really like Flipper, you'll really like Fake Shake. They were causing havoc in the R8 Esports back line, and R8 Esports will be very happy that they were able to take the win here ultimately, because it did not look easy at any point for them. So a great series. I would highly recommend this one. We had the French derby, then we had the Saudi derby, and now, right at the start of the year, this was going to be such an exciting prospect. We had Twisted Minds, the established, dominant Saudi Arabian team, and we had ROCstars, the up-and-coming Saudi Arabian team with this Korean talent. The Korean talent is no longer with them, and this version of the roster didn't get close to Twisted Minds at all. And this is about as one-sided as you will see a series go. The usual flexes from Yubi and Quartz looking good, all of this, but honestly, this was one-way traffic from the start, one-way traffic at the end, and very easy for Twisted Minds, who I think now sit pretty comfortably knowing they're going to be the kings of Saudi Arabia for quite some time to come. Then we get on to ENCE versus Sovreigns. So Sovreigns are a team who have sort of piqued our interest a little bit more this week especially, but against ENCE, they were just outclassed, outmatched, and ENCE, a series of straightforward fixtures for them this week, but only beat what's in front of you, can't you? So they beat all of those teams, they put themselves in a pretty nice position overall. Then we come on to the ToughShells versus nu.age. Now this was actually quite a it was a 2-0, but a close 2-0. And nu.age do come out on top, so actually you combine this with the earlier stuff we talked about nu.age. They beat an expected team, they beat a team they were close to, and they had a nail-biter against Peps. Again, great week for nu.age overall. Again, didn't get to catch this one live, but sharp, scoreboard-wise, smashing it. Really low death, super high kills you'd expect from your Tracer player, and I think probably a big factor in why they were able to do so well in this one and take the win home. Then we get Peps versus Meavedron. Not too much to say here. It continues to be a pretty good week for Peps. Not too many challenges for them outside of that nu.age game. This one's straightforward for them, and they take it home. Now, this was one of the more interesting series of the week, Sovreigns versus Supershy. I think for me, this was the result that really put Sovreigns a bit more on the map. Now, obviously, we know the Sovreigns players in terms of Shaq, Stan, Fi, Dollar. A lot of these players who are former Overwatch League players at one time or another, but they hadn't really made too much of an impression so far. They had a pretty good record, but they'd only beaten some of the weaker teams. But now this win over Supershy, I think this one actually is one of the more significant results they've got. So obviously we start all the way back on Oasis. It was a bad map 1 for Sovreigns overall. They tried to run some of the Rhine stuff, it didn't work out. And then when Midtown, they only get the cart to the end of second point, so they don't actually cap second point, and it's starting to look like, Supershy are here. But then Sovreigns come out, and they just start playing a hell of a defense on Midtown. They end up full holding them, if you can believe it. They turn that one around, and then we go to Shambali, and once we get to Shambali, it is just the Shaq show. Supershy choose to play a May composition, so they don't run their own Tracer, and then all of a sudden, the leash is off. Shax has ripped his shirt off, and he is tearing Supershy to shreds, and they just have no response to it. No response to it at all, and Shax really with a carry performance that helps Sovreigns in this win. And I think you'll see it when we look at the standings at the end, but Sovreigns are in a pretty great position, and this result is a big part of it. Now we go from that high and that excitement to R8 Esports beating REA, which is maybe the result you would expect, but it's a default. It's a default win for R8. REA have to forfeit in this one as well, so this was probably REA's toughest game of the week. But with this forfeit as well, they actually go 0-3, which is really devastating. It's really devastating for them. Obviously, R8 will be happy to not have to face the one-trick team. They circumvent. They get a little bit of a dodge, a free pass on that challenge. But yeah, it's a real shame for REA they've not been able to actually compete in more of these games, as it's gonna really hurt their chances as we get into the latter stages of the competition. Then we get Metaboiz versus Twisted Minds, which on paper could actually be quite exciting now after Metaboiz did so well earlier in the week. But ultimately, a lot of Metaboiz's strengths overlap very significantly with Twisted Minds' strengths, and Twisted Minds didn't actually seem to break too much of a sweat here. And again, Twisted Minds stay winning, remain unbeaten at the end of week 3, and put themselves in a pretty exciting position for when they face SSG next week. We move on then to ROCstars versus Quick Esports, which actually should have been a pretty exciting game, and it was, to be fair. But I thought it would be exciting because it was two of the teams that we've seen struggling so far, and it would be a battle for who can sort of get that win out of the two struggling teams, maybe start to give themselves a bit of momentum going forward. But then ROCstars had some issues. Gucci wasn't available, so Skyle had to play DPS, Oi had to play flex support, mostly Baptiste, and then Lotcha, the manager, had to come in to play Lucio. So when I heard that, I was like, well, Quick Esports will run away with it, but they did not run away with it, as you can see. It was a dogfight, an absolute dogfight. Quick do come out on top, but I imagine Quick is the sort of win that maybe won't even feel that great for Quick, considering they were playing against a manager and 2 off rolls. Really didn't have the right to be this close, I think, and ultimately, even though Quick Esports do get a win that they've been desperate for, it really doesn't actually do anything to help convince me of the Quick Esports roster. On the ROC side of things, it's probably quite a shame with how winnable this series felt without their full roster. If they were able to have their full roster for this, could they have actually gotten an important win? So a bit of a shame for ROCstars, but Quick catch a break and do get a win here. Then we get Celtas versus ENCE, and well, another straightforward game for ENCE, another one in the bag, and they continue their good run since that slip up against Ataraxia. Now we get to the headline game, Spacestation against Ataraxia. Now, everyone was so excited for this after Ataraxia had taken down ENCE. SSG had looked like a dominant force in Europe. Could Ataraxia stop them? Could they be the first ones to dent their momentum? Now, the first thing to say is there was no Crimzo draft in this one. SSG managed to avoid a lot of the key maps Ataraxia would have liked, like a Busan or like a Midtown or like a Hollywood. But then we go to Nepal, which in theory you can play a lot of Lucio comps. And it was actually Ataraxia who won the RAM Lucio Mirror Space Station, playing some of their sim stuff, but I don't think it was compositional. The whole thing just looked a bit of a mess, a bit of a rare weak performance from Space Station in one of these maps, and Ataraxia took full advantage. Shockwave was in fine form, and all of a sudden, when that result went through, it felt like it was on. Ataraxia were going to beat ENCE and SSG back to back. Really, really possible. Then Iconwold, Space Station's attack. They don't capture second point. They just get it to the end of the bridge. And then Ataraxia's attack goes pretty well. And SSG have to defend that last fight, in last fight situation for about 3 minutes. But SSG really pull it together when it mattered. They win all the fights, a load of intelligent plays and good decisions, people clutching out when they need to, sends it to Route 66, and this is maybe where we see the difference in Ataraxia's limitations in terms of compositional variety compared to SSG's. SSG were able to go dive, and when they went dive, Ataraxia tried a few things. They tried a little bit of Anakiri, they tried a bit of Kiri Lucio Diva, some different looks to try and solve the problem because Route 66 isn't the greatest map for their comp, but ultimately, once we got to this mirror, it started to look like SSG were pulling away. They sealed the victory pretty comfortably in the end, but really, after that Nepal, that Iconwold was not looking possible at all, and I think even though Ataraxia don't get the win, they don't slay the EMEA Goliath, actually, this is the sort of result and performance where I start to think, well, maybe Ataraxia, maybe it's a big 3 again. Maybe it's a big 4 with Twisted Minds. Maybe Ataraxia really should be in this sort of level of competition. And when we get to the latter stages of this, when we get to the knockout rounds, all of a sudden, if there's only 3 spots for EMEA, Space Station will definitely take 1. You feel ENCE will take another. Ataraxia and Twisted Minds battling out for 3rd, or can they even upset one of the big boys? It is actually really exciting. I think it's really opened up the EMEA region quite a lot in terms of who can qualify for the Esports World Cup, and really excited to see more of Ataraxia against these top teams as we go forward. Space Station had a second game that day against Quick Esports, and this one there was no problem. They took the 2-0, it was dominant, and they maintained their unbeaten record thanks to that. Then we get into some more of a weekend games, just finishing off this busy week 3, and Celtas played Meavedron, and it was actually relatively competitive, but still Celtas come out on top, and they'll be happy with that win. And again, Meavedron don't really look in a position where they'll be taking too many series or too many maps off any teams anytime soon, which of course brings us to the standings. So as you can see, we have 4 teams at the top here, who are all locked into 6 wins, but obviously, Peps and ENCE have played 1 more game, obviously of which they've lost 1. Twisted Minds and SSG play each other next week. I believe that game is currently going to be on Wednesday. So that is only 1 team can remain unbeaten and will go up to 7 wins and put themselves at the top of the table. So a super important game next week between Twisted Minds and SSG. I think especially when we've seen in SSG's game versus Ataraxia this week now, they can bleed. You can take maps off them. You can maybe even take a series off them. They are beatable. Really gives a sort of nice edge to that fixture coming up next week. As we make our way down the table, we see Ataraxia just behind them as well. But the team you maybe wouldn't expect to be here is Sovreigns. So again, we know Sovreigns have had more of their easier fixtures here. But with a good win over Supershy, knows the sort of games they need to win and really put themselves in a nice position to hang on. They've got themselves firmly in the top 8 and they're in a nice position to hang on to it as well. Meanwhile, R8 Esports have done a pretty good job recovering from their poor start. With a lot of their tougher games behind them already, R8 should probably maintain this position, if not increase it over time. If I had to guess, it would be R8 and Sovreigns would essentially probably swap places at one point as the fixtures and the strength of schedule starts to balance each other out. Once we get to this part of the table, though, it starts to get very interesting because obviously in joint 8th right now, essentially, remember, only one of these teams can eventually finish in top 8, or there's only space for one of them. Supershy, nu.age, and Celtas all mixed in here. I think Celtas are the team who maybe a bit surprised to still be up here. Supershy have struggled in a lot of their games. nu.age struggled early on, but are actually trending up. And this could really go any way at all. And a lot of attention to be put on those fixtures and to make sure they don't drop any series they shouldn't. And if they can either steal a win or beat the teams around them, all super important. So I think especially in this sort of like middle of the pack range, I think there's a lot of movement still to happen, and a lot of these results are going to start mattering a lot more, or feeling a lot more important when the games start as well. Then as we get down the table, maybe not too many surprises here. The biggest one is obviously R8, who now find themselves on a 2-5 record, and this is going to be a difficult position to try and recover from. And all these forfeits combined with the loss at the start of the week really puts them in a very tough position. And it's a shame as well, because obviously a lot of these bad results come more from not being able to field, either having to forfeit, or even some of their previous bad results they didn't have a tank player available. So it doesn't really feel like have had a full strength crack at this tournament in the same way a lot of the other teams have, which is a shame for them and their fans, obviously. We'll obviously keep our eye on them, see if they can recover, but certainly issues for them now, and they're in a hard spot to recover from. If we skim over, we can look on Wikipedia just to see the results from the week as well, just in one sort of handy place. Obviously, that game we'll talk about in a second, and the coming up, the SSG Twitter's mine still to come. But I think some of the nice trends we see, ENCE are obviously had a 3-0 kind of week, going to feel pretty good about that. SSG won the important game, won the easy game, also going to feel pretty good about that. R8 also hitting a 3-0 week to shoot themselves up the table. So a lot of trending up. It should be worth actually mentioning Peps did a fairly similar thing as well. Not the toughest games for Peps, not the toughest games for ENCE, not the toughest games for R8, but they won them all. Important games to win, and they've certainly reaped the rewards from that one. So with that all said, we can take a look at the schedule for next week. And now, obviously, we'll talk about it because we said we would talk about it. SSG versus Twisted Minds is going to join us in week 4 here. And also, what's going to happen quite interestingly is some of the fixtures from in the future. I think this SSG ENCE one is also going to join us here. So there might actually be 2 really big clashes coming into week 4, just with teams trying to schedule around previously games they couldn't schedule, or also bringing games forward to avoid any potential conflicts while they are in Dallas. Alongside that, there's not actually the most exciting games available. I think some of the ones worth keeping an eye on are obviously the Peps games, Peps versus ENCE. I think it'll be really interesting, a good test for ENCE, but also an important test for Peps. We've seen teams like Ataraxia prove, sometimes in result, but mainly in performance, that they can compete with the big boys, the top 2. Peps are chasing that, and this is a great chance for them to prove they are competitive with these teams, and that they are closing the gap on them. Likewise, Peps also have to play Supershy, which is an important game in terms of one they would expect to win, but don't want to be losing to any of these middle of the pack teams if your goal is to shoot yourself up the rankings. So a very important week for Peps, potentially a very important week for ENCE as well if this SSG game comes forward. Likewise, SSG versus Twisted Minds really will be the headline of the week. Elsewhere, I think there's potential for this R8 and nu.age game to be of importance. There's chance for potentially an upset there. Likewise, similarly, temporary name was their original one, but that is for Sovreigns. So them against Celtas will be an important game for them. If Sovreigns are able to win that one, they're really going to find themselves in a nice position. Obviously, Ataraxia maybe one they don't expect to win. And likewise, Supershy versus Celtas is going to be a very important game. So I think when you look at some of the games that Celtas have this week, it's a super important week for Celtas, a super important week for Peps, and potentially a very big week for SSG as well. So that brings us to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed all of that action. If you want to watch any of it live, I'm going to be covering lots of it on my Twitch, which you can see up here. And there's a lot to look forward to as well. So all that week 4 action, I'm going to try and bring you all the key games. We're also going to be doing a catch-up of the North American action from the last week. And again, a look ahead there. And again, we'll try and cover more of those games. So if you're interested in any of that, stay tuned to the channel. If you want to watch the full matches, lots of them are on this channel as well. You can find them below. Well, thank you very much for watching. And I'll see everyone next week for more of the same.